One of the things that people do that really affects their ability to catch snook is they, how do I say this? Make a lot of noise. They stomp their feet. They're loud. They're banging. They're clanging. You sneak up on a snook spot, and the last thing you want to do is get into the cooler. You don't want to bang your feet. You don't want to scuff your feet. You don't want to bang your knees into the gunnel, and you certainly don't want to be going in and out, in and out of the hatches and slamming around. You want to be sneaky. A stealthy snooker is a snook catching snooker. That sounds kind of stupid, doesn't it? Another thing, if you ain't got that cast, you won't hook that. Rhymes with cast. But you've got to be able to cast. If you've got to work on long distance accuracy and keep the spool very, very full. A low spool that only halfway full is not going to reach them. And don't try to overpower. Don't try to use too much line for the bait you've got. When I'm throwing the spool tech like this, sure, I'm going to fish 40, 50 pound braid, 60 pound fluorocarbon leader. But if I'm trying to throw something, I'm throwing something like a shrimp, I'm going to throw like 15 pound, 20 pound braid, and then like 30 pound fluorocarbon leader. But you've got to make accurate cast. That's important. The better you cast, the more you're going to hook that. Rhymes with cast. Number 3 is a lot like number 5, I guess. You make a bunch of noise with your feet, they're not going to eat. You drop the bait on their head and the bite goes dead. Don't drop the baits directly on their head. Always drop it to the outside. When you're fishing a dock light, you're fishing a seawall, drop the bait ahead of them. Let the bait come toward them. Don't throw the bait right on top of their head. Another one that's really important when you're snook fishing is boat positioning. You got to get your boat in the right position to angle the bait that you're presenting to them in the proper flow. I mean, if you're fishing a bait from uptide to downtide, it's important that you're not uptide of the fish. If you're way up in front of them and you happen to be fishing a shrimp, at no point in a shrimp's life will he be sitting there swimming against a 4-knot current. Shrimp don't do that. They flow with the tide. So you're going to want the boat down tide to start with, throw the bait up tide, and then reel it slowly with the tide. Now, if you're positioning the boat for like a pinfish or something like a finger mullet, a large finger mullet, that will buck the tide, you can throw it down tide and work it against the tide. That was a hit. You got to know your tides. You got to be, well, the number one thing for catching snook is you got to be where the snook are. So you got to know where the snook are, and you got to read the tides. You got to know the tide. You got to know when that tide's going out, because there are spots that are really good on outgoing tides, and then spots that are only good on incoming tides. But you got to find out where these feeding stations are, when these snooks stack up in these feeding stations, and position the boat properly, and be stealthy, and get that bait in there, a nice natural flow. And once you hook up, a lot of times you're hooked up in a residential canal with multi-million-dollar homes. These people don't really mind if you fish back there, but they don't want to hear you. So if you're fighting a big fish around a dock, put the rod tip underwater. Bury that rod underwater so the fish doesn't jump. And that will keep the fish quieter. And don't use radios. Radios have nothing to do with catching snook. Consuming large amounts of alcohol has nothing to do with catching snook. So I just tell people, try to be really quiet, accurate cast, super stealth, boat positioning, and proper presentation depending on the bait.